This video, like all my others, is brought to you by my wonderful patrons. Huge thank you to Carl Smith for becoming the latest patron. If you'd like to join them, you can go to the link in the description or at the end of the video to sign up for as little as $2 a month. By becoming a member, you can get many different benefits, such as the ones that you see on screen and more. Thank you for your consideration, and I hope you enjoy the video. 7 years ago, I married my wife, knowing that one day we'd be in the middle of a pandemic and I'd need a haircut. Thanks, babe. Mission accomplished. So let's talk about the Hive, the sword logic, and how they both fit into the many criteria of a fascist movement. The knee-jerk reaction from many people to any talk of linking politics to our video games is usually outright rejection, if not anger. I'm sure a decent percentage of you probably cringed a bit at the title or the thumbnail. And no judgments. I sometimes do it too. Given that, I could talk from my high horse about how this reaction breeds a culture of anti-intellectualism and ignorance, but I already sniffed my own farts in a previous video, and let me tell you, they didn't smell great. Rather, I think it's just a fundamental fact about fiction. Anytime you're creating a fictional ideology, it has to be based on something. Humans are creative, but we're not so creative that the real world has no influence on our creations. And so, if you pick apart any fictional ideology, you'll find fingerprints of their real-world counterparts, whether intentional or not. So, a while back, I put out a video talking about Savathun, arguing that under no circumstance should the future story attempt to give her any sort of redemption arc. I said that to do so would be to sympathize with a prototypical Hitler character, or maybe Goebbels, but there's really no effective difference. Someone responsible for the deaths of countless sentient beings and the demagogue of a dangerous ideology. In that video, I commented that Savathun and the Hive and the sword logic itself all smack of fascism, of a superior race. They are, if not allegories of Hitler, at least coded that way, whether intentionally or not. However, in retrospect, I think my statement in that video was almost too generous to both the character and the ideology. Now, I was gonna put in some sort of joke here about pissing off even more people with this follow-up video, but in all honesty, the vast majority of commenters seemed to agree with what I said already. Yet, there were still a few that seemed to take issue with the message. So, guys, if you're watching this one is for you. But just to be super duper clear, I am not calling anyone that disagreed with my Savathun video or that wanted a Savathun redemption a fascist. The only person I am calling a fascist is Savathun. Well, and Oryx, and Zivu Arath, and the rest of the Hive, and Hitler and Mussolini and Nazis and the neo-Nazis and the Proud Boys. So, to make this proof, I'm going to start by tying both hands behind my back. Not literally. Both to show how blatant this connection is, but also to preempt any naysayers. See, our main texts on the Hive are the Books of Sorrow. It's a really great bit of writing, and it tells us much more about the Hive than anything else from the Destiny universe. Nevertheless, it's written by an unreliable narrator. Or at least it might be. Honestly, the only proof of that is a small blurb from Savathun herself within the books, saying that it's all lies. However, I would challenge anyone to find an example of something that is verifiably untrue written in the books. As far as I've been able to find, there is nothing outside the omission/scrubbing of Nokris. It's likely that the claim itself was an intentional misdirection, an attempt at a galaxy-brained 4D chess move we like to think Savathun is constantly performing. But there is enough of a question to its veracity that any attempt to use it as a primary source is always met with an which was indeed a response a few people made to my last video on the subject. So we will not be using the Books of Sorrow here as our foundation. Still, it will be used to drive the point home once the main thrust has already been made. Alright, I think that's enough preamble. There is a seminal work on the subject of fascism with the specific purpose of defining the traits that reveal the movements for what they are, particularly in their early stages. It's an essay titled Fascism, written by Umberto Eco, who himself grew up under the rule of Mussolini in fascist Italy. The nice thing about this essay is that it gives a pretty comprehensive list of 14 defining qualities. See, when most people think of fascism, they think of two things: Hitler and authoritarianism. Or maybe not most people, but at least myself and most of the people I've spoken to about it. However, fascism is a special kind of authoritarianism that thrives, and indeed is founded upon, an us versus them ideology, which necessitates the creation of the authoritarian state. I won't go through all the traits, but I will put them up on screen in case you're interested. The four we are interested in here are: disagreement is treason or heresy. There is no room for orthogonal thought, as fascism is just as much an ideology as it is a movement. Pacifism is akin to treason. Contempt for the weak. The fascist movement always projects strength, and since there is no alternative allowed, the weak must be culled to keep that strength. Cult of heroism and the cult of death. Every follower is told that to defend the movement is heroic, and a good death is its own reward. To quote Eco,
"These features cannot be organized into a system. Many of them contradict each other, but it is enough that one of them be present to allow fascism to coagulate around it."
So even if only one of these qualities is present in a movement, a government, or an ideology, it's either already fascism or likely in the process of becoming it. But don't you worry, the sword logic isn't exactly a subtle ideology. First and foremost, if I were to ask you which enemy race is most closely associated with the cult of death, your immediate response would be the Hive. It's almost as though they were modeled completely after that ideal. Time and time again, we are told in-game that the Hive worship death. The Hive worship death. Like when Amanda Holliday says,
"They worship death, we serve the light."
They treat it as a truly desired reward for their society, as their deaths mean that the Hive as a whole becomes stronger. This is exactly what a cult of death and heroism is. It's actually kind of hard to find a single concrete example of this, as it's such a pervasive idea throughout the Hive that their entire lore and culture is based around it. Though we can point to things like in Shadowkeep when the Daughters of Crota arrange a mass slaughter tournament to find the best successor to their father, or just all of the rituals we stop throughout both games involving the torturing and killing of their own kind to gain more power. Death is such a core part of their ideology that disentangling the concept from the Hive is impossible. We also see contempt for the weak and the glorification of the strong in the same slaughter ritual of Shadowkeep, where hordes of weaker Hive are thrown at the champion Zul'Mok, and the other stronger Hive to suss out which is strongest, with particular emphasis placed on the prototypical strength of Zul'Mok, his mighty armor and his mighty sword and skill. But again, this ideology is so ubiquitous that you can find it in nearly every piece of Hive lore. We see the rejection of any kind of different ideas directly in the lore behind Nokris, the heretical son of Oryx that blasphemes against the sword logic by using his power for necromancy, the raising of the dead. This was such a perverse idea to the Hive that Nokris was exiled and struck from all the Hive records. Any disagreement with the sword logic is to be shunned. So that's already 4 of the 14 qualities of a fascist movement exhibited by the Hive, and I really didn't have to dig deep or stretch any logic to find them. None of this is subtle. Using the Books of Sorrow, though, I can find examples of nearly every single one of the other qualities in Hive society, just in case you didn't believe me. Again, I won't go through all of them, just the ones that stand out to me. The rest I'll put on the screen so you can pause to read if you're interested. Disagreement is treason. Teox is the embodiment of this. She cannot be allowed to survive, and as much energy is spent throughout nearly the entire 50 verses of the Books of Sorrow on chasing and killing her as is conquering whole other civilizations, if not more. Because an example of a krill that's not a part of the fascist hive mind is proof that it's not the only way. Fear of the alien.
We tried appealing to their hopes and dreams. This was largely unsuccessful, basically because they are already happy and indoctrinated. This angered us. You'll have to kill them and take their stuff. Do not hesitate. You're fighting the hypocritical puppets of a cosmic parasite.
Again, this is every alien species encountered by the Hive. They do not follow the sword logic, therefore they are weak and deserve to die. The enemy is paradoxically both strong and weak. All of the Hive's enemies are a threat to the universe in its final shape somehow, yet are still too weak to continue existing. No. Cult of Death.
What are you doing, my daughters? He asked. He was afraid that Ir Halak and Ir Anuk were trying to go into the deep, where only the tablets of ruin allowed Oryx to go. We are dying, father, they said, as many times as we can manage. That's adorably precocious.
This is simultaneously the funniest and most horrifying example. Limiting critical thought.
We propose a method by which ascendant souls can be detached and integrated into a tautological and autonomous thanatosphere, which we tentatively term an oversoul. Oversouls can be stored in a throne world as a mechanism of enhanced death resilience. As a side effect, new refinements to our death song may be achieved, moving us closer to a generally effective paracausal death impulse. Oryx brandished his sword. Speak the royal tongue, or I'll pin you up for ear to eat.
Even though, ultimately, Oryx's daughters are trying to further the goals of the Hive, they are chastised for using smarty-smart language as if higher thought is a threat to the sword logic, which of course, it is. So, I only highlighted a few of the listed qualities, but I found in total 12 out of the 14 that Echo laid out. Something like that is not accidental, and I'm sure if I looked harder, I could find the last two. Though, honestly, I couldn't be fucked to do it, nor is it really necessary, considering his quote that one of them is usually enough of an indicator to prove the point. Now, I'm not arguing that the writer of the Books of Sorrow were cribbing from Echo's essay, though of course it's a possibility. The essay predates the Books of Sorrow, and it's a pretty well-known work. Rather, the fact that these qualities are so pervasive among real-world fascist movements, it isn't hard to recognize them for someone studying real-world ideologies and creating fictional ones on their own. I hope you came away from this video learning something about identifying these types of ideologies, both in fiction and in the real world. And I hope that when the Witch Queen drops, that you'll all join me in bitch-slapping that fashy moth woman back down to the deep. She can't have Crow. He's my friend. He's mine. 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 My friend. Mine.